Okay, welcome everyone. Welcome to today's webinar on utilizing vocational work enclaves to support people in reentry. Our webinar today is presented by SAMHSA's Game Center with the support of SAMHSA, which is the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration. Our presenters today are Carolyn Waterman and William Mauser, and I will introduce them shortly. I'm Dr. Melissa Stein, a Senior Research Associate from SAMHSA's Game Center and Policy Research Associates. I go by pronouns she, her, and I'm joining from the Charlotte, North Carolina area. And you should see a chat box at the bottom of your screen. We welcome you to put in the chat, introduce yourself and where you're joining from. Before we move into the presentations, I have a few more introductory items to cover. First, the views, opinions, and content expressed in this presentation and discussion do not necessarily reflect the views, opinions, or policies for the Center for Mental Health Services, the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, the Center for Substance Abuse Treatment, or the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. So we do welcome questions throughout the presentations, and you should see a Q&A pod at the bottom right side of your screen. Please open that up and enter your questions. And at the conclusion of the presentations, we'll cover as many questions as time permits. We'll also be conducting a couple of polls throughout our event today. In order to participate, simply select your option and submit. You should have just seen a poll pop up, and we really appreciate your participation. We will be recording today's webinar, and slides will be shared via our listserv for all folks who have registered for this event. We'll also notify you when the recording is posted to SAMHSA's YouTube channel. A certificate of attendance is available for download at the end of today's presentation. Note that this certificate is for your personal portfolio use, and we are not able to issue CEU credits. We do have ASL interpretation for today. Our interpreters are Kip Opperman and Pam Orr. We also have live captioning for today's event. To view live captioning, click Live Transcript CC, then select Show Subtitles. Just a quick look at our agenda today. Coming up next, we have John Berg, who will provide some opening remarks on behalf of SAMHSA. He'll be followed by a presentation from today's speakers. But now I'd like to turn it over to John Berg, who is a Senior Public Health Advisor at the Center for Substance Abuse Treatment at SAMHSA, for his opening remarks. John.
Thank you very much, Dr. Stein. Welcome and good afternoon to everyone to today's webinar, Utilizing Vocational Work Enclaves to Support People in Reentry. We want to thank you all for taking time from your busy schedules to participate in today's webinar. And SAMHSA is very pleased to provide this webinar that focuses on the Vocational Work Enclave model. If you're working with individuals involved in the criminal justice system, you know that securing a job is a critical factor in ensuring a smooth transition back into the community after release from jail and prison. Finding and maintaining employment can be a challenge for individuals with a conviction or who have been incarcerated, especially for those with little or no prior work experience. Vocational Work Enclave programs offer a unique approach to supporting individuals returning to the community by providing them with work experience, educational training, and guidance around navigating the work environment. This webinar will introduce the Vocational Work Enclave model and how it can improve and support successful long-term employment for people with criminal justice involvement. Vocational Work Enclaves allow individuals an opportunity to gain work experience in a structured environment while also learning and developing appropriate work skills. Today, our speakers will provide a brief overview of SAMHSA's Adult Reentry Program, a look at approaches for supported employment, and key factors when developing programming for formerly incarcerated individuals. You will also hear from one of our Adult Reentry Program grantees about their program in Hawaii, focusing on their work enclave efforts. We are pleased to have two great speakers present today on this very topic. I want to thank our speakers, Caroline Waterman, one of our very knowledgeable and highly energetic program staff, and William Mauser, also very knowledgeable and a current grantee. Thank them for sharing their knowledge, expertise, and experiences today. And I had the honor of hearing Mr. Mauser speak at the National Association of Drug Court Professionals conference recently. So I know that you will gain great insights toward this topic today. And as always, I want to thank the Gain Center staff for their work in developing this and facilitating the webinar today. And so at this time, I turn it back to you, Dr. Stein.
Thank you, John. And now I'd like to briefly introduce our speakers. Carolyn Waterman is a public health advisor at SAMHSA. She currently oversees a portfolio of drug court and adult reentry programs at SAMHSA and the Center for Substance Use Treatment. Ms. Waterman previously directed a vocational rehabilitation services program that served thousands of clients with co-occurring disorders and developmental disabilities who were formerly incarcerated. She created a vocational 15-week program to accompany a work enclave project. She worked many years as a vocational rehabilitation counselor in a reentry program at Rikers Island in New York, in the SUD Women's Program, and in an active care program at John Jay College. Most recently, she was the director of SUD training and technical assistance at CAI Global, a nonprofit education and training corporation, where she served as the lead SUD expert for the SAMHSA-funded Center of Excellence for Privacy Health Laws. And she was the project director for the CDC's New Jersey Overdose Data Action Project. Ms. Waterman has also served as the executive director of the Coalition of Medication-Assisted Treatment Providers and Advocates of New York State. She has worked for 8 years as an adjunct professor at Hunter College, CYNU, in the Department of Educational Foundations and Counseling Programs. Carolyn is a nationally certified rehabilitation counselor licensed in New Jersey. And William Mauser is a certified substance use program administrator with a master's degree in adult training and education. He is the director of adult services at Malka, providing substance abuse and mental health and recovery support services for the state of Hawaii, including the justice population, for over 25 years. He's responsible for developing program strategies and systems of care to include professional development of clinical staff. He also sits on the Board of Ethical Compliance with the State of Hawaii Department of Health and Alcohol and Drug Abuse Division, and has previously served on the Board of Examiners for the International Certification and Reciprocity Consortium. Mr. Mauser was also at Substance Use and Mental Health Services Administration Conference in the Chief in 2010 and took part in developing SAMHSA's working definition of recovery. So now that we've covered our two presenters who will be speaking with you, now let's take a look at who is joining us. So I'm just going to wait for the results of our poll to pop up. Here they are. So we've got a pretty even breakout of folks joining from urban and rural locations. So 38% of you. So welcome. And then the remaining proportion of you joining from suburban locations. And we do have about a dozen folks joining from tribal lands, such as the reservation, Pueblo, or Alaska Native Village. Welcome. And then we've got, let's take a look at where you all are joining from in terms of professions. So I do see a majority of you, about 36%, joining from a community-based provider, followed by 16% of you joining from corrections, probation, and parole. We also, a good number of you coming from government and policy, as well as the judiciary. So thanks so much to all of you for spending your afternoon with us to learn about this topic. And without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Carolyn Waterman to begin our presentation.
Oh, thank you so much, Dr. Stein. And I love seeing all of you coming from so many different parts of the country. The chat just exploded. So welcome. So next slide. Thank you. So John just kind of went over this already, but my portion of the presentation is going to be a quick overview of the adult reentry programs that SAMHSA offers. I'm going to do a again, a brief overview of approaches for supported employment, and there are so many, but I'm choosing like two. And there are some key factors when developing programming for the formerly incarcerated individuals or those that are leaving incarceration currently. So next slide, please. So I'm going to start with some stats, and they're pretty staggering, and we probably all know them, but I just wanted to really emphasize that the Bureau of Justice Statistics claims that approximately 60% of formerly incarcerated individuals struggle with unemployment, compared to the low unemployment rate of 3.7% for the general population. That's a huge number. A study released from the Bureau of Justice Statistics in 2021 followed more than 50,000 individuals who were released from federal prisons in 2010 and found that at any time during a 4-year period, only 40% of formerly incarcerated individuals were employed, and those who were able to secure employment struggled with job retention, which is why we wanted to have this webinar. Just one, hopefully new idea, maybe an old idea or some new additions to what you're already doing to help kind of further employment for this population. Next slide, please. So some of you may be very familiar with the SAMHSA criminal justice programs, but the adult reentry programs kind of main purpose is to expand substance use disorder treatment and related recovery and reentry services to sentenced adults who are currently or formerly incarcerated with a substance use disorder and or co-occurring substance use and mental health disorders who are returning to their families and communities from incarceration in state and local facilities, including prisons, jails, or detention centers. The intention is to reduce the health and social costs of substance use and dependence to the public and increase the safety of American citizens by reducing substance use related crime and violence. In addition to the overall purpose of the adult reentry programs, there is also an increased number of individuals that we've served, increased abstinence from substance use, increased employment rates, decreased recidivism rates, increased housing stability, decreased criminal justice involvement, improved individual and family functioning and well-being, increased social connectedness, and decreases risky behaviors. At the end of this slide deck, on slide 38, you'll be receiving these slides. There is a link for the notice of funding opportunity that will go into a lot more detail if you're interested. So one of the things we require from all the grantees as they're receiving these funds is kind of showing us what's happening. So number of individuals they're serving, the diagnosis of those clients, whether they're abstinence from substance use at this point, housing stability, employment and educational status, social connectedness, which is family and friends. Do they have, links in the community? Their medical conditions, health, behavioral and social consequences, access to treatment, treatments provided, retention and treatment, criminal justice involvement. As stated in our NOFA, which is a notice of funding opportunity for the adult reentry programs, we require that grantees provide recovery supported services. Some examples are recovery housing, peer support services, childcare, supported employment, skills training and development, and transportation services that provide emotional and practical support to maintain client remission. This is important because one of the key factors in reintegrating into the community is sustainability, and that would include, among other things, employment. Next slide, please. So I'm going to only talk about 2 different types of supported employment for individuals with disabilities today. There are many more, but I'm going to concentrate on just these 2 types for this presentation. And the next presenter, William, at H Corp Honolulu County Opportunity for Reentry Programs Pathways to Work, will be walking you through their experiences with developing supported work for their client population, who are individuals who have been or are currently incarcerated. I'll be walking you and talking you through work enclaves and job crews. Next slide, please. So in this, there are 2 areas, and I'm going to give 2 examples also. So work enclaves, this is a group of individuals with disabilities, substance use and mental health, working together under the supervision of an agency employee Sometimes that agency employee could be a peer that has been promoted to an employee in a community business or industry. The pay rate is contractual relationship between the business and the agency pays the workers with disabilities either by piece rate, a straight sub minimum wage, or by pay commensurate with the production of the product. So I'll give you an example. There is a street sweeping program in and around New York City. There's many of them, but I actually worked and developed one in New York. This example was a program that had work enclaves out in the communities of New York City, sweeping the streets every day and utilizing clients with disabilities. So that's one type of supported work. Another type were job crews. So this is sponsored groups of individuals with disability who travel together to various work sites in the community. The method of payments are those that are used similar to the enclave approach. An example of this would be, we set up a program at MetLife Stadium in New Jersey so that we had clients attending all of the events like football games, concerts, and they would be bused to the stadium and they would work in concessions or whatever and come back. So that was an off-site location. So they were job crews. They did have actually somebody who was in charge of them also there, but they worked at a different under a location, right? Some other examples of those common activities performed in job crews are janitorial or maintenance tasks in buildings, businesses. So next slide, please. So one of the things I've learned over the past 3 decades of working with individuals with substance use and mental health and other disabilities, and that were formerly incarcerated, is that they usually have a very spotty work history, no work, or they have worked off the books, and long periods of no job because of their incarceration. It's imperative as we work with these individuals that we take nothing for granted. You need to start from scratch to assist the clients around getting and keeping a job. Usually we can find them a job, but that's not the difficult part. Now we need to work with them on the soft skills, such as working with a coworker, and to keep and retain that job and be able to move on to a better position after gathering some work experience on the books. As you begin to think about starting any type of supported work program, you need to think of the needs of your community and the level of your client's abilities. I'm going to walk you through an example of a work enclave project that started over 30 years ago. We started by going to community meetings in New York City with the local businesses like the Better Business Bureaus, the local community shops, and we established that rapport with the community. This is super key. If you're going to establish a work enclave, this is critical because most communities don't want the kind of clients you are proposing to put in their communities. You need to show the members of that community, including the local businesses, that each client that you will be supporting, you'll screen them, you'll be working with them, you will be working with them on unresolved issues that could happen, so you'll have a supervisor. They also have incentives for hiring clients that have individuals. There's a tax write-off. So you want to give them all the positives, that you're going to be that extra supervisor for them on the outside, but they're not going to have to, you know, you may even be able to walk them through the actual job and do some job work support. You want to give them information on what types of support your program will offer these businesses. Some of the elements you can offer include screening, as I just talked about, vocational classes, which would include some of the lists I'm going to talk about in a few minutes, supervision on a weekly basis. Each client had in this program I worked with a clinical counselor working with them each week, and they were given hands-on training around the type of work they were going to be performing. This gets back to the example we discussed earlier in New York City street sweep cleaning. They will be starting by going to, an example is they go into the office and punch in. They get their supplies ready for the day and head out with a group of clients called the Enclave, the Work Enclave, with a supervisor. Again, it could be a peer as an employee, or it could be an employee that is hired, overseeing the group throughout the day. Their task in this place was to pick up trash on the sidewalks and in the streets. They would then come back to the office to clean out their garbage cans each day, replenish the trash bags, and repair and replace any broken equipment. they would then have to punch out and head to a substance use treatment program, or for evening groups, or a vocational class that was provided by the Work Enclave program. They were given a stipend for the actual work and expected to put in at least 20 hours a week, and the remaining hours were for their substance use treatment or vocational classes. The vocational classes would entail both soft and hard skills meaning resume writing and interviewing skills, but also those soft skills, practicing things like actual work scenarios. Another key component of the supported work is to assist them in getting competitive employment after completing the Work Enclave program, which in my example, clients stayed around 3 months in the program, got work experience, then we worked on resumes. The program that we had a job placement specialist on staff to work with each client to find competitive employment after they had established some work experience and worked on both those hard and soft skills that frankly were really new to most of them prior to getting a job. They'd never really had a real job. Next slide, please. So some of the hard skills we're all kind of familiar with: resume writing, interviewing skills, job applications. I think everybody in this room, I'm sure, has done some of that. So hard skills are those skills that usually need to be taught. Some examples are what I just mentioned. So I'm going to give you one example of something that kind of caught me off guard early on. I had one client who had been incarcerated most of his life. Working together, we were able to find him a job. One day I received a call from the employer that the client was a no-show at work. I immediately thought, oh, he must have picked up again and went off the grid. I reached out to the client. He was sick with the flu. He never called out sick to his employer, so the employer fired him. This was an educational moment for both of us and a great reminder about the fundamentals. While it is obvious to us, we don't think to go over that you must call your boss if you're out sick. We shook our heads and went, oh, hello. All these basic things that we take for granted need to be stressed to clients. Showing up on time, calling ahead if you're going to be late, not stealing small items from the office like pens, papers, staplers, right? We all have those. One of the things you want to make sure is you really go over those basic things, because those are things they may never have done before because they've worked in illegal jobs, they've worked off the books, or they may have very, very spotty work history. Next slide. So the tougher one is the soft skills. Soft skills are the most important areas to concentrate on. And in this area, where if a client cannot work or exist with a coworker, they will never learn to sustain gainful employment. We all know someone that we work with that probably needs to improve on some of these skills, or they will be fired or have already been terminated. We worked a lot in this area and did things such as case studies, role plays with different scenarios. This was a way to work on correcting some of the responses before they were going to get placed in competitive employment, and work out the areas that they need to improve on. I'm going to walk you through a couple of those because when I was looking at this list, I thought, so we used to give like a sheet of paper to everybody and they had to kind of do an activity, and there'd be these scenarios and they got choices, right? So I would have put this on the screen, but I didn't get time. You were given free concert tickets from a friend. Last night you were given those free tickets, right? The concert is today, but you are at work and you have a big project due. What do you do? First choice, call in sick for the whole day. Second choice, go to work and leave work early to go to the concert. Third choice, thank your friend and don't go to the concert. Fourth choice, go to the boss, explain the situation and see what can be worked out. I can tell you, I've done a million of these scenarios over the last 30 years. There's always a different answer. So what you want to do is role play with them if they choose one of these, what are the ramifications of that choice? What could be the outcome if they decide to call in sick for the whole day? I had one client call in sick. He went exactly the scenario, went to a concert, and he was up taking photos, and they ended up on a Facebook page, and the employer saw it. So nowadays, it's much harder to get away with stuff. Another example is the time management area. A lot of our clients have never used a calendar. or a journal or kept track of a calendar or what their work week looks like. So we gave everyone a calendar at the beginning of the program, and then we had them start keeping track of their tasks, their work days, their vacation, their holidays. And this was probably the first time many of them ever actually had to keep track of anything. So that, again, was a real key thing. Another area that I think is very hard to do, and it takes a lot of practice, how to work with coworkers. So on the job training, we did a lot of that while we were working in the enclaves, have discussions of who's going to be doing the shift for that day, right? Or that week. Getting coverage when they can't make it, talking to their coworkers, say, can you cover me for this week? Learning how to negotiate the job, sharing the job, and having the conversations with your team and learning how to talk to each other. Sometimes it's just how you say something or how your face is looking. I had one young individual who used to say, well, he looked at me the wrong way. Okay. And they walked off the job just because the coworker looked at them the wrong way and they said they're not going to stay there anymore. So we had to kind of backtrack and practice that scenario before we place that individual on a job the next time. So in summary, I wanted to just say, I went over a little bit about the reentry programs, a little bit about the supported employment approaches, and some of those key factors when developing programming for formerly incarcerated individuals. Bottom line is providing these individuals with the skills to maintain employment over the long term. And as I learned firsthand, be sure to go over those fundamentals that you and I take for granted. William will now go into some depth around how they set up a work enclave and discuss the challenges and successes, and we'll be happy to take questions at the end of the presentation. Next slide.
Well, again, I should say good afternoon. It's actually still the morning time for me here in Hawaii. Good afternoon, everyone. And I wanted to just take the time to thank SAMHSA and, of course, the Gain Center for having us. It has been a very rewarding contract period for us, or grant period for us. So got a lot of good information to present. So today's presentation will cover 4 areas. First, we will provide a brief overview of our substance abuse treatment continuum and recovery support services array for reentry program participants. And then second, we will provide more in-depth information about our pathways to work efforts, which combine recovery housing and employment support processes. Next, we will present some of our program evaluation findings, which show outcomes trends over the last 4 years. And then finally, we will wrap up by presenting some of the lessons we've learned over the recent grant period. Next slide, please. So the Honolulu County Opportunity Reentry Program, code HCORP, is built around a substance abuse treatment continuum of care with 5 distinct levels of care. These levels taper off in service intensity as follows. As most of you know, residential programs offer a 24/7 integrated primary and behavioral health care treatment system in a therapeutic environment. And most of our participants coming out of incarceration qualified for that level of care. And then once they complete that level of care, they transition into a day program, which offers services 4 days a week, 4 hours a day and at 5 days a week. And I'll get more into what the timelines look at as we move on in the presentation. And then if they complete that level of care, they move it into intensive outpatient program, which offers services 3 hours per day, 3 to 5 days a week, actually. And then, of course, they move into outpatient program, which offers 3 hours per day, 1 to 2 days a week. And then eventually, aftercare program or continuing care program offers about 1 hour a week, one 1 hour, 1 day a week. And that can vary. It could be group therapy, could be individual therapy. It really depends on where the participant is at that time of his recovery development. Not to mention, wasn't mentioned on the slide, but we also provide a clinical withdrawal management program based on the ASAM 3.2 withdrawal management criteria, and employ an entire medical psychiatric department providing services for those who may be encumbered by a co-occurring or comorbid condition. And in the later slides, you'll see some of our statistics reflect that most of those that we were reentering from incarceration into the community had a co-occurring condition. So services for the justice involved follow the risk need responsivity model and includes the following key elements. One, using standard assessments to determine the appropriate placement in the substance abuse treatment continuum. Assessments used to determine placements are, we work really close with here in Honolulu with the Adult Client Services Probation Department at the First Circuit. And what we retrieved from them as we were entering part of that re-entry planning, they gave us access to the LSIRs and ACEs, which really helped us to focus some of the case planning and treatment planning on the 3 top criminogenic needs, which are very useful and vital in terms of rehabilitation. And as they move into through this process and eventually move into other parts of our program, which I'll talk about more later. And so we use the ACEs, the LSIR and the ACEs as part of our assessment process to include the Addiction Severity Index. And those 2 assessments gave a very wide perspective on the needs and the acuity of the needs that we were going to address with each of these participants. Using evidence-based practices in cognitive behavioral treatment. Specifically, we use the University of Cincinnati cognitive behavioral intervention in group therapy settings, as well as motivational interviewing strategies in group and individual therapy settings. More generally, our substance abuse treatment services are person-centered, culturally informed, and designed to meet clients where they're at in terms of learning ability, responsivity, and motivation to change. Next slide, please. The H Corp focuses on enhancing engagement and retention in substance abuse treatment continuum of care through an array of wraparound recovery support services, including facility in-reach, which provides institution-based orientation to H Corp services, records review, clinical assessments, and reentry planning. Case management services, which provide key linkages to public assistance and entitlement programs. Care coordination among community treatment and correction stakeholders, as well as supportive employment services and processes. And also our peer specialists, which aids case management and facilitate psychosocial groups and pro-social activities in the community with our participants, but also use their lived experiences to encourage and motivate participants. And then 4, recovery housing, which provides a clean and sober living environment for participants while attending day treatment and outpatient programming. We provide this service through a network of contracted providers and in conjunction with vocational rehabilitation, counseling, and work enclaves. We will provide more details about these services a bit later. Next slide, please. So this is our projected timeline of services, as you can see, which altogether could last up to about 12 months. So H Corp services began with facility in-reach from an H Corp case manager whose primary focus is on developing a collaborative reentry plan that is approved by the participant's probation officer. So part of that stakeholder buy-in was very instrumental. We didn't only receive the LSIR and the ACEs, but we got their approval for H Corp service, plus we got their terms and conditions, which was very instrumental in helping us develop where someone would reside once they left residential. centered on detailing steps to achieve substance abuse treatment and recovery support service goals, and strengths-based and includes participants' input and preferences in terms of their own self-directed goals for improvement. The SAT Continuum begins on the first day of release from incarceration and typically starts with admissions into residential programming. The residential program lasts for approximately 45 days on an average, but could be shorter or longer depending on the complexity of the participant's substance abuse, mental health, and primary care needs. The same is also true of the other lower levels of care. The day treatment program is the next step down, lasting about 45 days in average. And then eventually they move into intensive outpatient, which is the next step down, lasting for about 90 days on an average. And then outpatient is the next step down, lasting for about another 90 days on an average. And then eventually, again, as we mentioned earlier, aftercare is the final step of the continuum, which lasts about 90 days. Wrapped around the substance abuse treatment continuum are H-Corp specific recovery support services, which include vocational rehabilitation counseling, which occurs during the residential and day program levels of care. Recovery housing provides a clean and sober living environment for participants stepping down from residential to day treatment. And these services typically last until the end of the intensive outpatient services. And then work enclaves are paired with recovery housing supports and will be described in more detail later. Okay, next slide, please. So H-Corp focus on two separate but sometimes interrelated pathways to work. The first is vocational rehabilitation counseling, which begins during the client's residential stay and continues through the day program. And a lot of the things that Caroline had mentioned earlier goes into this piece. H-Corp case managers provide basic VR services designed to get clients ready for work. This includes career planning, exploring previous work experiences, desired work income, and potential limitations of having a criminal record. Some employers may be able to discriminate against those with criminal record due to the nature of the job, for example, police officer, banker, and so on. This service also includes resume building, helping to put resumes together for specific jobs, or job search for jobs that they are qualified and competitive for, guided internet searches, of course, the development of soft skills like Caroline mentioned earlier, interviewing for jobs, working with others, work ethic, time and attendance, being a good, quote, employee. The second pathway is through the City and County of Honolulu Work Hawaii American Job Center program, which we partnered with as well, which provides support services as intensive vocational rehabilitation counseling and linkages to employer networks, hosted job fairs, and the like. Access to paid apprenticeships in skilled trades, as well as internships and field placements in other in-demand sectors. The rent-to-work program is also a huge incentive and provides vouchers and other housing subsidies for those who hold full-time employment for at least 3 months. Next slide, please. The other pathway involves an integrated housing and employment support model. We have a memorandum of agreements with a network of supporting housing providers. What we did to encourage that is that we invited the Clean and Sober or Therapeutic Living Programs community in our, on the island of Oahu, and we invited them to a dinner. And in that dinner, we had discussions about how we could collaborate. What would our MOU look like? Some of the goals and objectives of the H-Corp services. And so we established these MOUs with an understanding that we were going to collaborate together in terms of helping the participants succeed. So these MOUs primarily spell out the specifics on how However, we'll collaborate with each other on behalf of H Corp goals and objectives. Partnerships include therapeutic living programs, clean and sober living program, group home housing providers. We also had informal agreements with community organizations that provide work opportunities. These include a for-profit social enterprise organization called MOCA, Movers and Liquidation, and several nonprofit community service organizations in need of volunteer work that understand and embrace the objectives of the program. Next slide, please. Is that the next slide? Yeah, okay. Makana o Keokua, in English terms, means a gift from the powers greater than oneself. Operates 3 types of supported housing programs that vary in terms of structured living. MOCA's therapeutic living program provides a 24-hour structured living environment for people attending Hina Mauka's day treatment and intensive outpatient programming. The TLP also provides 10 to 15 hours of work readiness and on-the-job training per week, as well as other psychosocial education activities. MOCA's Clean and Sober Housing Program provides a semi-structured living environment for people in Hina Mauka outpatient and aftercare program. And then MOCA's Group Recovery Housing Program provides an unstructured living environment for people who have completed treatment but are unable to afford or find housing independently or with their family. Makana o Keokua also provides moving and liquidation services, as I mentioned earlier, for H Corp participants, where they earn a stipend to subsidize rent or other living expenses. Next slide, please. Okay, those who receive H Corp grant subsidies for rent, recovery housing, and participate in 6 to 8 hours per week of work readiness or community service work enclaves. Some of the benefits include, when they're participating in these work enclaves that we've experienced, is that most importantly, there's an old saying that idle mind is a devil's playground. So part of these work enclaves help occupy our participants in the interim of preparing for jobs and just the entire preparation process. So one of the benefits is that occupied free time in the interim of participants transitioning from intense to less intense treatment services. For example, from day treatment, if they were participating in day treatment, they would participate in these work enclaves on the weekend. If they were in intensive outpatient, they would participate in work enclaves sometimes during the weekdays or off treatment days and weekends, and so on and so forth. Some of the other benefits provide meaningful experiences regarding what we call as an appreciation and a giving back process. And let me give you an example. We have an employee here who does volunteer work at a ranch, and it's owned by an older female, and she's single female, by the way, because her husband had passed. So this employee provides her own volunteer efforts there, and so they recognized that the lady could use some help around the ranch that she was managing. And so they had this arena that was almost the size of a football field. And it's filled with, sand and dirt like a normal horse arena, but the weeds had overcome the arena. So she had asked, if the H Corp participants could provide a service at the ranch. So I told the employee, why don't you talk to the owner of the ranch and let them know what we're about and the population, a little bit about the population, justice involved people. And so she went back and spoke to the owner of the ranch, and with some reluctance, she said yes. So she was somewhat didn't really understand the population. She just knew her own understanding was what she hears on the news and all this stuff. And so nevertheless, we set it up and we went there with 24 participants, some from residential and some from outpatient. And so we scheduled the day, we went out there, And what we did with the Enclave is that, so the owner hadn't arrived yet, but the employee that does volunteer work was there. And so we bring the group out and we say, okay, this is the task, these are the objectives. And then we ask the H Corp participant, how would you like to accomplish this task? So what happens is you get people that step forward from our group and they say, take leadership, and they say, okay, why don't we try to do it this way? And then what that does, it encourages other people to participate. So myself and another staff member who were overseeing the activity were observing all this. So what they ended up doing is that they ended up creating a line, and all the men were in the front, surprisingly, and the females were in the back. They had agreed to, this is the way we're going to tackle the process. The first line will pull the weeds, which were, only about knee high, but very easy because it's sand and dirt base. And the females in the back would bag them up in a garbage bag and put them where it's standing and collect it later. So in about 2 hours into the project, they completed the whole arena. And just as they completed the whole arena, the owner pulls up. And the owner comes out of her car and she stands in one part of the arena and she looks at her arena, what this 24 participants had done would have taken her weeks and weeks to do by herself. And she just started crying and crying with a sense of appreciation for the H Corp participants. So they all gathered around and she thanked them and bought them some refreshments. But myself and another peer specialist was observing this whole thing. And so you could see you could see that these participants were receiving that message differently, independently. Some took it somewhat personal, but nevertheless, after the event was done, we normally, offer them, let's go to a beach somewhere where they can freshen up. And that's the great thing about Hawaii. We got all these really rich and lucrative resources to use. So we go to the beach, they're frolicking in the water, and eventually we create a circle and they start processing what the event was like. And we had a gentleman who was a part of that event that was in residential that was very reserved, and he had a real long history of homelessness, constant recycling through the legal system and the jail system, and just real reserve. And he spoke up, and this is what he said. He said, I didn't realize that I could make a difference in someone's life. And what happened is later on in his treatment experience, he later on shared that growing up, no one appreciated, his family didn't appreciate who he was, the things that he did, and he just grew up just feeling really not appreciative. And so that experience kind of made a change for him. But not only those experiences help impact our participants and realize that, hey, I've been taken from society for so many years. This is an opportunity I got appreciated for of giving back to my community. So you get those kind of meaningful experiences that come up between the participants, plus the leaderships that show up. And not only that, they didn't even realize that they invested in just eliminating the stigma that has upon our population. And all that happens in one little experience like this. So that's I thought that would be a great example to share how our work enclaves empower not only our participants, but even our staff members, because we take those experiences and we go back and share them with the rest of the clinical team on how we can enhance treatment efforts. And some of those things we recognize or have observed during that experience can be used even to help develop job skills. So that's just one example of many that we've encountered. So other benefits include instills a sense of purpose and contribution for participants, provide opportunities for staff to observe participants in a natural setting and identify strengths, weaknesses, abilities, and even preferences of our participants. Experiences and observations can be used to enhance treatment, case planning, and help identify work attributes. Next slide, please. So from a historical standpoint, actually housing providers here in Hawaii have been providing community services, activities of this nature, or work enclaves, if we call them today, for a while now, to include health agencies, religious organizations, and other faith-based movements. And I think the reason why, from at least through my years of experiences, is that because we have such rich resources here. You know, we have the ocean, we have land-based, we have fish ponds, and and just it would be a waste not to capitalize on those things. So I think that's probably one of the reasons I can speculate that why this has been happening here in Hawaii for a little while. So Hinomalka adopted these types of activities and basically just formalized it by adding some structure and using its outcomes to enhance and improve treatment strategies for participants. Another example I can give you real briefly, if you've been to Hawaii, you may be familiar with Waimea Falls Park, which is an attraction for most visitors. And so we went there with 48 participants because we have a 64-bed facility, so 48 participants. And what we do is we break them up into groups of 12, and we have one staff member that manages each group, and then the stakeholder there, the point of contact there, gives this group their task. And so what we do is we go and we watch the same thing happen. We observe, we document, who's showing up for leaders, who's actually followers, who's just trying to evade the event entirely. So we take that information back to our clinical team, and we use that, and we try to figure out how we can use those things to enhance treatment efforts. May that be developing treatment plans. Sometimes you find that people are really good with their hands, but can't read and write very well. So maybe we use their creative juices to express group assignments or express individual assignments, their treatment plans. So like, as we mentioned earlier, one of the biggest in the R&R model is the responsivity to treatment. Yeah. So we invest a lot in that piece. If a client is not responding to our treatment interventions, that means the treatment intervention needs to change until we find something that they can respond to. It's just another example that we've experienced. As mentioned earlier, Work Hawaii provides several vocational programs that serve the same individuals we serve, which made partnering with them much easier. Some of the programming we're able to capitalize on was their, again, rent to work program, provides short-term rental subsidy assistance for up to 24 months to people experiencing homelessness who are willing to increase income primarily through employment. Another service they had there was the Ticket to Work program. It's an employment network that provides assistance to persons with disabilities who are receiving Social Security benefits with the intent to obtain employment through one of their supportive services. And of course, nothing beats pounding the pavement ourselves, right? So we were also able to search out organizations, nonprofits in the private sector that were suitable for our participants. Some of the examples I gave earlier was the ranches. We did fish ponds, some of the visitor attractions, farms, tourist sites, and so on, to conduct structured work enclave activities. One of the unique things about Hawaii, as I said earlier, is the abundance of natural resources, ocean, waterfalls, exotic landscapes, and so on, that provide a lucrative atmosphere for participants to express themselves after a structured activity. There is much to be said about how environment impacts overall health. Most of our participants embrace the idea of just being outside of a facility. Activities conducted in a natural setting gives us opportunities, as stated earlier, to identify useful attributes and qualities that are used to enhance and improve treatment strategies, but also identify potential leaders and good examples for incoming participants. Next slide, please. Our OAP grant was very useful. And again, thank you, SAMHSA, for funding pretty much funded our case managers, our peer specialists, and other positions that were instrumental in searching for opportunities, meeting with other stakeholders, not only addressing stigma, but also informing them of the benefits and services our H Corp offered participants. Ongoing discussions with POs, judiciary leaders, and community stakeholders helped with establishing trust and confidence in the program. Eventually, the program spoke for itself. In fact, Adult Client Services, our probation department here on Honolulu, adopted the housing case manager model and released an RFP in 2021 incorporating these elements. We were very fortunate to connect with the community efforts that worked in conjunction or had similar objectives as H Corp, which is the rehabilitation of the justice-involved population. The key components was to respect their approach to rehabilitation and see if we could fit or enhance what they did, which resulted in a win-win partnership. Next slide, please. So here is H Corp 2 participants' demographic profile. Just some statistics, as we mentioned earlier. We enrolled 371 participants by the end of our year 4. We're actually in year 5 currently and winding down our last year of this grant. As you can see, we served a larger percentage of males because almost all of the participants qualified for residential at the time of assessment, and our residential program comprised of 75% male beds. Majority of our participants were Native Hawaiian or Pacific Islander, which is not unusual given we are in Hawaii. But over 50% had a dual disorder. As mentioned earlier, Hinamalka, employs an in-house medical department that provides an array of psychiatric and medical services for those who are dual diagnosed. Most intriguing statistic is majority of the participants identified their primary drug of choice is meth. This has been a drug of choice at least for the past 10 years here in Hawaii, as far as we know. Followed over with 50% claimed to be homeless, 81% to be unemployed, and 21% to be financially indigent prior to incarceration. Next slide, please. This slide represents data collected from 2 projects over the course of 7 years. Keep in mind that H Corp 1 did not have the intent to provide housing and employment support services, and yet it showed that those who completed were housed and employed. And it was based out of the University of Hawaii at that time. However, their efforts gave birth to the idea that those who were housed and employed were more likely to complete the substance abuse treatment full continuum of care, 93% and 53% compared to those who were not housed or employed, which is the 19 and the 21%. As you can see, the H Corp 2, which incorporated with the intent to provide housing assistance and employment support services, increased the number of substance abuse treatment completions because they were housed and employed. Also, H Corp 2 was integrated into a community-based program, Hinamalka, which made access to substance abuse treatment, full continuum of care more feasible. Next slide, please. This slide represents data collected 30 days prior to the discharge interview. The data represents H Corp 2 only, with each item corresponding numbers representing average days. So the 2 major points to consider is that stable housing and employment increases the likelihood of program success, and stable housing and employment produce better outcomes. As you can see, as if someone who their drug of choice is alcohol, when they're in stable housing, they drink alcohol, or the average is approximately 2.5, 3 days versus compared to someone who wasn't in unstable housing, and so on and so forth. And for me, I think one of the alarming, most critical statistic is the actual number of crimes. And, because our goal is to reduce recidivism and rehabilitate offenders. So for those who are in stable housing and has stable employment, had reduced recidivism quite a bit. So I'm most impressed by those numbers. Next slide, please. As illustrated previously, we know that participants do better when engaged in supportive housing and meaningful employment processes, even by drug of choice, including those who were dual diagnosed, and most important of all, programs who treat the justice involved population, the reduction of recidivism. Those who did not fully engage in supportive housing and meaningful employment processes had the tendency to engage in unfavorable activities that eventually led to relapse. The list you see under non-completers is what usually happens in chronological order. Some of the wild cards you see here are conditions that could have influenced our outcomes. For example, if a participant had pre-existing housing and employment that was supportive and understood the importance of treatment and recovery support services, the likelihood of success was much greater than those supports that contradicted or misunderstood the importance of treatment and recovery. And then next slide, please. I mean, this slide kind of speaks for itself. I believe that's, as mentioned earlier in the presentation, project staff conducted outreach efforts to build working relations in the community early on because we knew it was going to take partnerships to be successful. Not to mention the partnerships we had established prior to commencement of the H Corp 2 project. As the slide says, teamwork to make the dream work. Here in Hawaii, we say it takes a village to raise an individual. Next slide, please. And this is just an acknowledgement slide. It speaks for itself. I did want to say that, Dr. Andres, who's the project director, was unfortunately couldn't be with us today, so I sat in his place. And again, as humble as he presents himself, he does not have his name on this list. But I just wanted to give credit where credit would due, that Dr. Andres was an instrumental component to the success of H Corp. And I believe that concludes my presentation, and I'd like to turn it over to Dr. Stein.
Thank you so much. Yes, I love seeing the emoticons float up. So thank you. You've obviously reached our audience and shared some critical information. So you may have just seen 2 slides go by that was some references, and then a resource that Caroline referred to. Thank you. The supported employment model. If you're interested in more information, there are some links, and when you receive the slides, you'll have access to these hyperlinks. And oh, thank you, Ashley. Ashley just dropped them into the chat. So now we can move into the Q&A, and as a reminder, please drop your questions into the Q&A portal, and we'll get through as many as we can during the remainder of our time. So I'm just going to start from the top and go through these. And Caroline and Bill, please, I'd love to hear from both of you regarding most of these questions. So would love to have both of you provide input. Okay, so we had a question early on. I believe this is during Carolyn's part of the presentation. And so I think that there's need for more clarity around payment and how people are compensated for their work through the enclaves. So someone asked, are you allowed to pay less than minimum wage? And so, yeah, Caroline, if you want to take that one.
Sure. Because it's an enclave and it's a work experience, it's not a job where it's not competitive employment. So the difference is you are giving them a whole package. You are offering them a chance to have and develop their resume with some work experience that is work. And then it's also giving you all those supported tools. As we said, the person has to go to their substance use treatment programs. After they complete their shift, they then also need to complete at least a 10 to 12 week vocational program. And that would include everything, as I started saying, from hard skills to soft skills. There, you know, we had full days. And then when we did like an intensive one, and then we broke one of those up into hour increments 2 or 3 times a week. So the clients would do their shift, then we do a class for an hour, then they go home, because that's about all that anybody had, you know, brain power left in the day. But the hour to hour and 15 minutes, you know, worked really well to get like an activity done, and then they completed check 1. And that, once we broke it up into that, I think it was like 33 weeks. It ended up being a long time. So we had to kind of keep playing with the curriculum, but they would also receive the stipend for completing the vocational piece also, not just the hours worked in the field. So they were getting like a stipend to do this. So there was the incentive piece there, and a lot of the money came from the businesses and the communities. So I did this in a couple different locations, but the one in particular in New York City, it was actually the Tribeca area, and the actual businesses actually gave us funding to have our work enclaves go clean and sweep in front of their businesses. And also when it snowed, they would shovel. So they brought shovels during the snow, they brought salt that we provided with them. So again, they had their big buckets and they had everything that they needed to clean in front of those storefronts. So that's why the discussion with the business individuals and going to their work, doing the presentations, got them involved. And then it was just a matter of keeping them, because the city didn't provide any of this. So people were like, I need my spot in front of my business clean. So it was a business that people wanted in the community. And again, it was also having that discussion about these individuals are going to get more supervision than somebody you would normally hire, if you think about it, because they had us as backup supervisors. They had our phone numbers. They were able to call us if their employee had an issue, if they didn't show up. We were able to follow up for them. So there was a lot of perks to having our clients be their employees or doing their work in the front of the building. So I'll let Bill jump in too if he has something.
I think for us, that I mentioned stipends as well, but I think that I meant that to be the housing support system. Those that were housed had these entrepreneurships, like Mocha had. What they did is they retrieved older furniture from hotels that were ridding of these old things, and what they would do is they would, you know, recondition them and put them up for sale and create that as a stipend. And then those who were, you know, not only reconditioning these furnitures, were learning skills at the same time. You know what I mean? So, and then the subsidies of that went to these individuals that participated in that. Now, that's not something my agency did. And I think, you know, when I listened to Caroline's presentation, she was farther in advance, I think, than us at this point in terms of enclaves are concerned. You know, right now we're not collecting any money, or we're using it for more. I don't know if that would be the appropriate term, but I think more for enhancing current treatment efforts. But yet we got still yet our efforts still got some room to grow and move into what Caroline is talking about. So we find that work enclaves carry many faces. They provide many opportunities for not just my participants, but for staff. You know, they get to witness these people in natural settings, and, you know, the qualities that show up there compared to a 4-room office differ sometimes a lot. So.
And so what I'm hearing is that this isn't just a standalone employment, just putting people in low-paying jobs. This is more of a comprehensive program where we're supporting people with additional supports and services as they begin to sharpen and really develop their workforce skills. So, you know, our listeners were taking what you're presenting and still wanting to go, I think, to the next level. So we had one person ask, you know, what about starting an enclave with landscaping or another skilled trade that could produce living wages to establish sustainability. So, what are your thoughts about that? Carolyn, you're nodding, so I want to start with you, and then Bill also would like to have your input.
Okay. I didn't catch the last part, but I do understand the question. So I will jump in. Yeah, again, it's whatever your location. So you look at the location of where your program is located. What services could you offer your community? Again, in New York, it's unlimited, right? Some of you may have a smaller area to be working with, but one of the things we added to our sweeping the streets was we did offer going in and doing small demolition jobs. So, again, we came up with a second kind of work enclave where we found businesses in the community that wanted like a wall taken down, or they wanted to paint a room in a business, or they want, just small things that, we could work with the clients that had some skills and maybe also bring some of, like doing some mentoring with peer-to-peer. So somebody knew how to paint, they would mentor somebody who had the basic skills, and we would work with them to go on that enclave. The idea was to help their resume as much as possible. So the job crews that we sent out to Met Stadium to work, the concerts and things like that. Again, they did get minimum wage at the concerts, but it was seasonal. So they only did that for very short periods of time. So we wanted to also have them have other experiences, so their resume had multiple things on it before we started marketing their resume to actual competitive employment. So the key was they had no work experience before that. Many of them, we had to be a little creative, with their resumes. They had been incarcerated for like 20, 30 years. And we, had to start somewhere, because to develop something and have them have a conversation with an employer to get a job on the books, we felt we had to have them we had to see what their work ethic was also, and their work skills and their work style. So to help them find those jobs that could be the stepping stone to a job and a career that they could be happy about, we had to have them have those experiences. So it was whatever. So landscaping, if that's your absolutely, you work with your community, develop those relationships. And if they are willing to pay your clients, again, you could do a stipend type thing or a minimum wage. But you got to be careful with the clients, their medical supports and things like that. They can't work over a certain amount of hours. They can't make a certain amount of money until they're out of treatment. So just be careful about what those levels are before you start seeking full-time employment or a lot of hours with minimum wage, right? That's when you start having to look at those numbers.
Bill, do you want to add to that?
Yes, if I got the question right, but so for us, we had to start with working with, developing a policy in conjunction with input from our insurance companies, our workman comp companies, even Department of Health here, Alcohol and Drug Abuse Division had opinions about, okay, why are you taking clients out to go do these work enclaves? And so we had to have those discussions and develop and find a way to navigate through these things to make these things work. And what the result was is that we had to develop a policy that gave us guidelines. And as I say, these are structured activities. And not only that, there had to be how would you use these events or activities to benefit client treatment? You know what I mean? What part could that benefit? So we had to be able to articulate that before even embarking on these volunteer, we call them volunteer efforts in a community, because so we had to work through that policy making, talking to our insurance company, because as you know, our insurance companies have opinions when you take people out and put them in more high risk environments versus residential. And so the risks needed to be reasonable was the term we had to put it up. They had to be reasonable risks. So before we go out and do the type of work enclave we're doing at this point, we have to make sure we assess where we're going, the risk, is it a high risk area? If it's not, then maybe that's not something we can do right now. And again, we're on the verge of developing this, with Caroline's input and expertise. We've started moving more towards this because we see it very beneficial for the population we serve, especially the justice population. So.
Yeah, I'm going to jump in on Bill's comment for one more thing. We did have a phenomenal relationship with all the treatment programs we worked with who sent us clients. So, Bill's working with the program, and we had we would support the clinical staff who were working in the Enclave project, but also they would be working with the clinical staff in the treatment programs. So that was key because we were able to you learn so much about a client when you see them work. And when you're observing their interactions with other clients, many of them, I can give you a million examples, but we would, one group would kind of go off and they'd go have coffee instead of sweeping the streets. And we'd get a call from one of the restaurants saying, half your clients are here having coffee. So we'd have to go and make some calls and go find out why they were there. And then those clients would have to sit out a session, go talk to their clinical counsel. So we did have a lot of we got through a lot of barriers that had they done that on a real job, they would have lost the job. So what I felt was so important and why I was really pushing for this whole presentation was it's so important to get the clients to have that experience working in a job where they're punching in and out, where they're learning how to work with a supervisor, a coworker, doing a task. So important because so many of our clients don't have that experience and they need to learn how to work, right? So they know how to work, in illegal things, most of them, but they didn't ever have a job that they had to punch in and out for the most part. So to teach them those skills was imperative and get that piece on the resume. So we felt that it was really important to work really closely with the substance use programs and have that contractual piece and have all the safeguards in place. So just want to throw that out.
That's really helpful. Go ahead, Bill.
Yeah, I think also what stood out for me in these experiences or these ongoing experiences is, how environments impact people and their behavior. And when I just know that the clients behave differently in a more natural setting than they do in my office. If we're sitting down having an individual session, what I get from them and their response or the responsivity for that is going to be different than if I was sitting at a beach, having a conversation on a coconut tree or sitting on a reef next to the ocean that has a little pond with my feet in the pond and we're talking about life-changing events. It just stimulates environments, just stimulate different conversations and different things. It just sets the tone for really important things. I think for clinicians, I know they're important because I can help them identify what I just heard. What I heard that, this is what I heard you say about yourself. We should capitalize. There's something we can capitalize on. And that could definitely relate or correlate with developing working skills and certain attitudes that I need, such as Carolyn mentioned earlier, showing up for work on time. Doesn't take much to do that, but just to get up on time and plan and get there. You know what I mean? So those little things can make big impacts in their lives.
We've had a couple of people ask about how do we get started? How do we partner with community businesses to get started and start an enclave? So any advice for encouraging communities to build these partnerships to allow people in treatment to participate in volunteering activities or establishing an enclave? What suggestions might you have? And this time we'll start with Bill and then end with Carolyn.
Well, in our case, our CEO it plays a big role. You know what I mean? If he says no, then nothing's happening. So, getting a buy-in from our CEO and sharing with him what the potential benefits and of course, and other factors that may play into this. So, but mostly if your organization supports it, is really putting your foot to the ground and establishing relationships with the community. And that will give you an idea of what you got to work with. I think Caroline referred to that earlier, is building these relationships within your immediate community and look at the resources you have available that you can utilize at a moment's notice. And it doesn't require much to access. And so, and again, like here in Hawaii, we're very fortunate, I think, in many ways, because we have, such a natural environment that I think everyone here that comes would prefer to be in that environment than be in a facility. So, you know what I mean? They would rather go out and do treatment activities in, at the beach than, so, but you got to find those kind of resources and start building relationships with people. That would be my advice.
I would say, one of the things you definitely want to do, again, kind of, it's individualized. I would say, look at your community where your program is currently located. Is this something your community needs? What I found too was so important is that many community members had a vision of who these individuals were prior to them working for them. And after working for them, they all wanted more clients. And it wasn't about the money, that it was less money than minimum wage. It wasn't about, because many of them got hired as permanent employees in many of the businesses that we did the street sweeping, and they were paid great and given benefits and everything. It was more, they were seeing a different side than they had ever seen before. And I think it's both educational for the community, it's educational for us as kind of working with the clients to try to get into a more productive employment situation, and also work with their treatment providers to help them get through, those next steps to become productive members of society and have competitive employment with benefits and, housing and everything else. That's the goal in all this. And it's baby steps, but I think this is one of the first steps that needs to happen in many cases because it's that exposure on both sides.
And then we I think the flip side of building these partnerships with the community and with businesses is you also want to protect the clients and your participants who are in your enclave from any potential exploitation. So what safeguards might you put in place, or what might you watch out, red flags you might watch out for in terms of working with businesses that might employ your clients? Did that question come across clearly?
Yeah, I can jump in. I think one of the things that our clients did have was a ton of support. We were on top of who they were being, where they were being placed. We knew the employers very well. We sat with them. When you go for a job, many of us apply for a job, we don't really know what we're getting into. These clients were given, we scouted out places that were receptive to our kind of clients, that knew what they were going to get. Many of them were very excited to do that and to be part of the program. And they used us well because they would call us and they would tell us, ooh, so-and-so was having a rough day. He didn't look so good. You may want to touch base with him. And we would, and find out, yeah, he was not doing well. And we got him right into a group, and we were able to help kind of figure out that something triggered while he was at work, right? And we were able to see that. So seeing both sides of it, you have an employer who's receptive and able to give us feedback when the client is at work, instead of just going through treatment, placing a client on a job and never seeing the client ever again, right? And not really knowing what's going on. And we know that work can be one of the most stressful locations to be in. And it also can cause some of that relapse that we've had with many of our clients. So you want to make sure they're safe. And so working with those employers that you've already kind of developed a great relationship with is wonderful. So that's one of the things that I thought was very useful for this type. It's a nice stepping stone to permanent employment.
Thank you, Caroline. Bill, anything else you want to add to that?
I could not answer that better.
All right, well, great. I just want to say thank you so much to Caroline and William for their presentations today, for sharing their expertise and giving us more things to think about in terms of helping to support people with substance use disorders, reentering our communities, helping move people into employment. And so now I'm going to move into covering just the last few slides of our webinar. We have a few more resources, but first, yes, so I see some emoticons coming up now. Thanks so much, everyone. And Ashley has just dropped into the chat the certificate of webinar attendance. And so you should click on that and your computer will prompt you to download it to your computer. And then you can personalize it for your personal portfolio. And I'm sorry, Bill and Caroline, you're not going to get to see all the chats that would usually come in. We had to pause the chat so that people could see the certificate of attendance in the chat. But so feel free to click on that and download it. Next slide, please. If you have not signed up for St. Census Game Center's listserv, here is a QR code, and Ashley just dropped the link to our listserv in the chat. So you can click on that. It will take you directly to a website where you can opt into our listserv. Next slide, please. And finally, if you have any additional questions, have some issues that are outstanding from this webinar and you would like follow up on it, feel free to reach out to us here at Census Game Center. Our website URL is at the bottom of this screen. And we also have a toll-free direct line if you would like to call us. And so we're happy to follow up with you with any other questions you might have. And finally, we had a closing poll pop up. If you would like to participate and continue to provide us some feedback, we'd welcome that. But finally, thank you again, Caroline and Bill, for your expertise and your time today speaking with all of us. It's just been a really wonderful learning experience. So thank you so much. And thank you to everyone who joined us this afternoon. Looking forward to seeing you at the next Games webinar.